My name is Mark Bryans. I am the rector of All Saints Anglican Church in downtown Honolulu, and I am a Theophilus Fellow. On the night that he is betrayed, John 13 tells us that Jesus, before what happens that evening takes place, before those things transpire, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things into his hands. This phrase is not new in Scripture. This is a phrase that we see all throughout the Old Testament. When something is put into your hand, it means that you have the authority to exercise dominion and sovereignty over that thing. And therefore, when Jesus, on the night he's betrayed, begins what's going to culminate in Good Friday's death and the torture and the arraignment before that, he knows that the Father has put all things in his hand. This alone is marvelous, that Jesus, knowing that he has all power and authority, willingly goes to the cross. This is marvelous. This is the stuff of a Good Friday sermon. What we sometimes miss is what precedes Good Friday. Jesus, on the night he's betrayed, knowing that the Father had put all things into his hand, decides on his last night of ministry, with all authority in his hand, to host a meal, to invite somebody to offer up a room, to invite his disciples to gather around, to break bread. And before breaking bread, he disrobes and wraps himself in the garment of a servant. He washes their feet. He is hospitable. He extends the welcome of a Lord and King with all things in his hand. We see this language of all things being put into somebody's hand. For instance, in Genesis chapter 9, when Noah gets off the ark, Yahweh says, "I have put the lives of all the animals into your hand." This means Noah has authority. We see this, for instance, in the promises that God gives his people as they leave Egypt and enter Canaan. God says, "I will deliver the Canaanites into your hand." And this happens in Joshua. The idea that God puts our enemies into our hand is something that we see when Ehud rallies Israel against the Moabites. He says, "Follow me, for Yahweh has delivered Moab into our hand." This is what David's men advise him when Saul has entered the cave that David and his men are hiding in the back of. His men say, "David, do you not realize that the Lord has delivered your enemies into your hand?" It is this kind of delivering into somebody's hand that Jesus knows the Father has given him on the night that he's betrayed. And his response to that is maybe unlike how we would respond. If you knew the Father had put all authority into your hand, had delivered your enemies into your hand, we might be tempted to do all sorts of things with that power. What Jesus does with all power in his hand is to set a meal, to lay a table, to extend a welcome to his disciples who do not deserve it, to disrobe himself and wear the garment of a slave, to wash feet, to break bread, and to bless. The Christian call to hospitality is to do with the authority the Father has given us, his church, like Jesus did when Jesus was given all authority, with what the Lord has given you, big or small, as much or as little as the Lord has given into your hand. We are called to lay tables. We are called to vest ourselves in the robe and the raiment of servants, to wash feet, to serve, and to break bread. With all the Lord has given you, may you extend the table of God into a world that desperately needs it.